And I give the call to the honourable member for Mitchell.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The opposition welcomes the motion from the member for Jagajaga in relation to our Pacific family and the role that Australia has played for a long time in supporting our region and the peoples of the Pacific. It was, of course, the Turnbull, Abbott and Morrison governments that stepped up and ensured that Australian foreign policy pivoted from the rest of the world to our region. And we weren't alone in doing this. For those members who were here, you will recall President Obama on the floor of this House announced that US foreign policy would pivot also to our region. This was continued by President Trump and has been continued by President Biden. And what it says is that the Pacific region is one of the most significant in foreign policy terms to the world and also to the United States of America, but most importantly to Australia. Our Pacific family came first under the previous government, it came first in our foreign policy objectives, and it came first in our aid and other delivery budgets. That's why most of our aid budget got spent in the Pacific. That's why Australia is still the largest development partner of every single country in the Pacific today. So we welcome the government continuing the policy to ensure that this region is at the forefront of Australian foreign policy, at the forefront of our development dollar, because we know that our family here in the Pacific is the most important for the security of our region, for the economic prosperity of our region and the success of the peoples of it. And that's where we could recommend to the government that they enhance a motion such as this, the member for Jagajaga. They could have, of course, spoken about some of the economic challenges that face our region. And when you go to the countries of the Pacific, as I had the opportunity to in government, many of them as the minister, you'll see the abject poverty that many people do live in the Pacific. It's a serious issue. Abject poverty has led to malnutrition. Malnutrition has led to issues like stunting, which Australians still don't know enough about, of entire generations of young people and populations. And I do believe it's incumbent on all of us here, and I know the government shares the view, that we do need to do as much as possible to help our Pacific neighbours, our friends and family, to make sure that we lift peoples out of this abject poverty, malnutrition, to make sure they have healthy lives. So we welcome motions like this that promote healthy living and ensure that Australia will be at the forefront of efforts to do just that in the Pacific. Climate change, of course, is a significant concern, and when you go to places like Tuvalu and you understand that the highest elevation is about 2 metres above sea level, always any human population on the archipelagos of Tuvalu will be very, very concerned, primarily every day, with changes in the climate, changes in the weather, changes in the sea levels, because their highest elevation, coming from an island like Australia with huge mountain ranges, hard to understand the psychology, but when you go there, 2 metres above sea level is the highest elevation. It's a prime concern, and we understand that and we accept it. Of course, the government will say, as it says here, continue our government's policy of having climate at the centre of our infrastructure development, and that's why Australia has been such a good partner for this region, because the infrastructure we build is resilient for the climate. It has to take into account the frequent tropical storms and cyclones that have happened over many generations in the region that happen more at these days, the frequent and extreme weather events mentioned here. So our funding has been resilient. It has taken into account climate, and it's better placed than all of the other efforts that come from other partners of the Pacific in this region. And that's why Australia has spoken loudly about the need for other partners who might like to come into this region. There's some notable ones, whether it be the United States or whether it be China indeed, who come into this region and they spend their development dollars in a way that is not resilient for the climate. There are plenty of examples of environmental disasters from other countries that do not take the care that Australia takes in relation to environmental projects or economic projects in the region. They have wrecked the environment of many particular countries, and you can go to examples in PNG, in Solomon Islands, where you've seen the strip logging of forests and vegetation in the most environmentally unfriendly way, where you've seen pristine waters spoilt by mining operations from certain countries and partners that wreck the environment. The opposition knows that Australia has always had a very, very good environmental record in the Pacific region. And of course, because it's our backyard, just like it is our prime foreign policy area, and we would never despoil the environment of the Pacific. But that's not the attitude of other partners. So we welcome motions like this that recognise Australia's role. We support the government in attempts to keep the Pacific at the forefront of foreign policy, but we do take to task those partners who do not have the care or concern or the peoples of the Pacific at the heart of their agenda, and we say Australia will always put the people of the Pacific first.